All right, welcome back to another very special episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels. Or is it? I've been questioning that lately, but today we will talk about something far more important awakening, about consciousness, about Reiki, about so many more topics with a very amazing guest, which many of you probably already know and have actually read his books and heard his own shows since he has done well over 300 shows of interviews in his archives. And that happens to be the one and only Bernard Alvarez. Bernard, welcome to the show.
Hello, Dr. J. Thank you for having me on tonight.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine and everybody here who's in the chat. Now, let me start with a very basic question. For many, I'm assuming most people know this, especially people listening to this channel, and we've talked about this topic before. But in your terms, in layman's terms, what is consciousness for those people who don't know?
Well, from layman's terms, so I have to simplify it a little bit. I believe it's a pretty multi-layer definition. Let me start, I guess, from the highest vibrational level that we can talk about. For me, in my experience, consciousness is the everything, and that everything in the universe is conscious, whether you want to call it God, goddess, nature, the universe, source, whatever, the terminology that you are comfortable with. I do believe that that is consciousness. And when we incarnate into a physical body, a piece of that consciousness, incarnates into this physical form, and we begin to experience what we call, in the Bible, they call it the Garden of Eden situation, the fall from grace. In other terms, in Buddhism, it's the facet of the diamond. We begin to perceive things separated from that one main consciousness, and then we get to experience it from this physical body, and the awareness of being in this body, the awareness of the place that we are, the awareness of the story that we identify with as our identity. That to me is what consciousness is.
Real quick, I need to give a shout out to somebody who's already given me a super chat, a supporter of the show, a listener, the one and only Alex Oyen. Alex, thank you so much, and I always hope I pronounce your last name correctly because I'm seeing it. So maybe if you could, at some point, write the phonetic spelling of your last name so I don't screw it up. Unless I'm getting it right, that would be great. And of course, thank you everybody out there in the chat already. Also, I do want to let you guys know, guys and gals, of course, in the chat, that we are going to be taking your questions. Just let me get a few questions out of our guests here today because we do only have one amazing power hour, and it's never enough. And I promise you, you're going to be so interested, we're going to have him back. Now, with that being said, when do you think this consciousness or the awakening started and people started to recognize consciousness? Because from what I realized, we're definitely in a shift right now. Obviously, some religions and philosophies have already believed in consciousness far longer than we've ever taught about it or even thought about it at this point. So, what's your take on that? When did it start?
For me, let me start by precursing that answer. When did it start this time around?
Okay, yeah.
It's fair to say that consciousness seems to grow and to ebb and flow, wax and wane throughout the cycles of the ages, and we've had wonderful awakenings. For example, back in the early Egyptian history or Kemetic history. Then that was taken over by the dark priests, the Kemetic priests that kind of suppressed consciousness. And then we see a little bit more in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Then it gets suppressed again, and then we saw a little bit starting to happen in the 60s. Again, that got squashed by the state. And most recently, it's fair to say that we've had quite a big awakening starting, I would say, couple years after 9/11, maybe around 2003, 2004, and it seems to have grown quite a bit since then. I found that my own personal journey really blew up around 2006, 2007, when I was being contacted by tens of thousands of people, not knowing what was going on, what was happening to them. They're having this profound shift of awakening and consciousness. And why am I dreaming the way I am? Why am I developing psychic abilities? Why am I seeing through the veil of corporate news and geopolitics, and all of this stuff was happening all at once. And again, we're seeing it now. We're starting to see where we're getting many more people now waking up to not only the truth of the planet, not only the truth of the control grid that is around the planet, but the awakening of who we truly are and our infinite possibilities. And when we start to realize that no one can suppress our consciousness, that our consciousness is eternal and infinite, we can finally shake off the what I call the ultimate conspiracy, which is the suppression of human consciousness.
There's already a question if you want to take it.
Sure.
Okay, this is from Maltese TV Dog Channel. Why are they trying to control us?
That's a really good question. I'm not one of them that's trying to control anybody.
No,
so
I know you're not. You're awakening us.
I'm saying you might be better off asking one of them, but in the way that I perceive it, and I see it as an insecurity. I look at human nature in general, and when people have a tendency to want to suppress people or control people, it's only because they are insecure of losing control themselves. I would hate to speculate and overgeneralize, but it's fair to say that since the times of the serfs, since the time of the kings and the peasants, there has always been a wealthy, I hate to use the word elite because it's so stereotypical. We hear it so much these days, but those who think that they have the divine right to control. And we saw it especially happening after World War I, when the British royalty started losing a lot of control and a lot of their wealth started slipping. And now we're starting to see that now with people saying they are just fed up. They are tired of being told what to think. And you see the backlash in all of this new media happening. A lot of the new media gets taken over. The new media is being created to distract us more and more from going inward and keeping us busy looking outside of ourselves. You can see it in the daily news that we see. We hear topics of, someone's using a teleprompter, or somebody said this thing, and someone said, it's turned into this soap opera to distract us from our own thoughts and what our own feelings are. And the first step we have to do is to learn to be mindful and not allow ourselves to be distracted by the nonsense in DC on both sides of the aisle.
I definitely agree with that, and there seems to be a whole lot, like you said, especially now. And you're absolutely right. After 9/11, a lot of people seem to be more awoken to the fact that things have been happening, that things are not the way they seem, lifting the veil. Another thing that I've heard from several people is downloads. Can you talk to us about downloads? What are they, and why more people are getting them, and what is it that they're doing that they're getting them as opposed to people who aren't getting them?
That's a really good question. I appreciate that, because that is something that was a big part of my, let's call it chapter 3 of my awakening, was the downloads. And for me, what I find a download to be, the definition for me in my own experience, is that suddenly, either through a dream or through just a moment of clarity, this enormous amount of information and understanding is, how shall I say, it's put into my consciousness. For lack of a better term, we throw the word around epiphany a lot. And that, to me, that doesn't cover it. The download is a much better term for that, because there's so much information involved in that. Suddenly, you're understanding, you're understanding the cycle of life. You're understanding the wholeness and the infinite of it all, the all of it, which is very difficult for many people when we're distracted by so many things. Downloads can give you information on healing. It can give you information on utilizing shamanic or magical practices. It can give you information on, it can give you clarity and discernment on your life choices. It's just an amazing experience for those who have had them.
Another question for you from Lasha Senyak. Some people think that our DNA is changing to accommodate a change. What does Bernard think?
Oh, I firmly believe that. I believe that while I absolutely have no scientific proof, and again, this is only speculation, but my gut and my sense and my common sense tells me that as we evolve and as our consciousness evolves and we unlock all of these infinite abilities that we have to, whether it be to heal our bodies, whether it be to communicate telepathically, whether it be to shift our consciousness from one part of the planet to another or from one planet to another planet, of course, our DNA is going to have to evolve to accommodate so much of this life force energy. In magic and in metaphysical, especially in the mystery schools, there is this concept that we cannot see the true face of God, the light, the source, the goddess, again, whatever term works for you, because our bodies cannot handle it. It is too much for our body to withstand that much energy moving through us. So I do believe that in order to accommodate, the full expanse of the light, the creative force, the creative life force, our DNA must evolve.
Let's talk about the pineal gland. How do we awaken it, and why? A lot of people talk about that is what is our spiritual antenna. First of all, would you agree with that statement?
It is our what?
Spiritual antenna.
I would say so. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I appreciate that because the pineal gland happens to be my favorite sensation when I'm meditating.
Now, how can we unlock it so we can access these psychic powers?
Well, there are multiple ways. The first and the easiest, of course, is your what you put into your body. And when I talk about what we put into our body, I don't necessarily only mean our diet. Yes, of course, we talk about how fluoridated foods and processed foods and artificial ingredients and whatnot have an ability to calcify the pineal gland. That's old news, but the reality of it is not only that, we must be aware of what we're putting into our mind. What are we looking at every day? What are we listening to every day? What are we feeling? What are we sitting on? What are we laying on? What sensations? Our diet is only one thing we put into our body, but our other senses is what fills our mind. So our seeing, our taste, our touch, our hearing, all of those are a part of our intake of the diet, our daily diet of our mind and our body. So being aware of that is the first step. Once we start being aware of that, and by the way, I'm not one of these people that believe we can be perfect. I believe in harm reduction. If you can stop using fluoridated toothpaste, some people need fluoride on their teeth. Some people actually do need it. Most people don't. Just you do that. Use filtered water. But we're not all going to be perfect in our diet. We're all not going to be perfect at the things we look at and listen to. So I believe in harm reduction. Do the best that we can. Once we get a handle on that, it's quite easy. We start feeling better. And the moment we start feeling better, it's quite easy to go into an altered state of consciousness, either through light meditation, such as breathing techniques, just breathing correctly in through our nose, feeling our diaphragm, doing several breaths, and then focusing on that area right behind your brow. And that's about where the pineal, the sixth chakra is considered to be housed there, and the pineal gland is supposedly behind the sixth chakra. And I do is...
Is that the crown chakra?
No. The crown chakra is the seventh chakra. That's on top. The brow, where your eyebrows are, just behind the eyebrow, the sixth chakra is considered to be there. And that's our seeing. That's where we see that which is not physical, or we sense that which is not physical. But it's quite easy. I use a modality that's called toning. Toning is a little different than chanting. They usually teach us this in the mystery schools. But a simple example is I'll just do an Om, but I'll drop 1 or 2 octaves. I'll just do a Om, and I feel the vibration behind my brow, and that's how you begin to stimulate it. And as we begin to stimulate it and develop a relationship with it, that's how we open it up and wake it up.
Now, I know you have several hundred videos on your channels, and I'm assuming you have a full video on this, right?
Yes, I believe there's 2 of them.
Because that's something I definitely will want to check out. And I'm glad you brought up the fluoride, because I've been using fluoride-free toothpaste for at least 4 years now already. But I haven't done the breathing as much, but I have been meditating for quite some time. I've gotten out of it. I've gotten out of it recently because of lack of time and some medical issues. But when I have time, I make time for it, because I think it's one of the most important things, not only to calm down, but to try to access my subconscious. I have another person I constantly speak to who's on the show is Dr. Shannon Panzo, and he teaches a course on how you can unlock your subconscious to have basically your photographic memory. Now, is that something that is part of the psychic powers that come through from the pineal gland?
I would say it's different for everyone, and photographic memory is not one of my gifts. That is certainly true. For me, the path to awakening and the path of expanding consciousness, we have to give ourselves a break and try not to be all things to everyone, or all things of what we define as the awakening. Some people are going to be great at photographic memory. Some people are going to be great healers and work wonderfully with energy. Some people are going to be great at manifestation. Some people are going to be great at being diplomatic orators to help heal the planet. So wherever you're drawn to, wherever your passion is being pulled in that direction, follow that for a little while and see if that's for you. And it'll change. It'll change. I used to have a photographic memory. Now, with the work that I'm doing, I don't have that anymore.
I've heard the argument that, again, this comes from Dr. Shannon Panzo's course, Docs Pro, that we are born with essentially a perfect memory. And it isn't until we start school where we're taught linear thinking where we essentially suppress our perfect memory. What's your take on that statement?
I happen to agree with that. I believe that I look at it from a little bit of a different way. I look at it in the sense that the brain is no different than a hard drive, let's say. You know, you have a 2 terabyte hard drive. Once you filled it up, there's not much room to put new information in. So I believe that is why I've allowed myself to forget so much. I need to bring in new information. So I kind of throw things in the trash very easily if they're not important. But yeah, I agree. That's definitely something that I can align with.
Can some people, or do most people who access their subconscious and also activate their pineal gland and have these extra psychic powers that we all should be available to have? And it seems to me at one point we all had that power. Do they have the ability to see the future, or no, because it's constantly changing?
That's a very interesting question, because then we're looking at different timelines and different dimensions. I do believe we have the ability to sense in what direction the timeline is going. For example, I do readings. I do tarot readings, and when I do a tarot reading, I tell them the cards are telling you a story. And that story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And usually I'll say that story is going to be about 3 to 6 months long. But that story can change anywhere along the line. When I do a reading, I strictly use it in the sense of the energy started off going in this direction. This is the way the energy is flowing. And the energy points to this particular outcome. if the energy keeps going in that direction and with the momentum that it is. So yeah, if you kind of ride the wave, you know it's going to land on the shore, but you might jump off the wave and move to another one. So yeah, but it's just a matter of learning to see and understand where the outcome is going to go. It's actually it's something I picked up in my early years, understanding algebra and mathematics. This plus this equals that, and just applying that to energy, we are able to tell what the outcome is going to be in a specific situation. So yeah, we can tell the future, but it can easily change by us changing our mind.
Yeah, exactly. Like a river, right? It would change like
Yep.
a different stream, or like a tree, right? Another branch.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Exactly.
another thing, Doctor Roger Lear. If you have you heard of him, the alien implant doctor who sadly passed away a little over 6 years ago.
I think I may have. I think I may have had one of his patients on my show that I was friends with for a little while.
Anyhow, he told me something interesting, and this is what I want to get your take on. He told me that the Tower of Babel story was essentially that we all had telepathy, and we must have done something to upset the gods, so-called gods, meaning whether they was actual the creator or was it ETs that created us, whatever it was, that when we started speaking in tongues, it's essentially that the first time we had to vocalize our thoughts because we couldn't we can no longer use telepathy, and so that was essentially the first time we started physically speaking the way we are speaking right now. Do you think that's a plausible story? Did we have telepathy, and for whatever reason was it shut off?
I certainly do believe that, and I do believe it my intuition and my past life memories have always shown me, and again, I can only speculate to what the answer is, but through my own experience and sense, that we did have these amazing telepathic abilities. We had these amazing energetic abilities to heal each other, to heal ourselves. And somewhere along the line, someone did not like that. Whether it be someone tasted power over people. Actually, a very good example that I can share with you is a story, actually not even a story, but it's comedic history. I had Stephen Mailer on my show a couple times, the author of Land of Osiris. And he talks about how prior to the patriarchy, prior to the priesthood of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, it was an agrarian society. Everyone had the ability to communicate with the gods, with the divine. And it may not have been equal in the sense of everybody had a nice house, but equal in consciousness. Everyone had the same abilities. Everyone had the same consciousness. And eventually what had happened is that the beginnings of patriarchy started in ancient Egypt with these dark, priesthood, this dark priesthood, I forgot what the word, the Hanut. The Hanut began to take over society and made people and created these barriers between the general population and the divine. And so people had to go through the priesthood in order to communicate with the divine. And that's where you begin to see the separation, historically speaking, of us losing our abilities to have divine energies and divine powers.
Now, since you talked about being friends with one of the patients of Dr. Roger Lear, what's your take on UFOs in general? And I'm assuming because you spoke to one of his patients who had an implant, I'm assuming one of the 17 people that had the implant removed, right?
Yeah, he got it removed on a television show, actually. He was one of the people filmed.
Do you remember? Was it Watchers, or was it Patient 17, or the one that Third Phase of Moon and I did together, which was the Alien Human Project 1 or 2, or was it on TV?
I believe it was on TV.
Okay, so it's probably one of the earlier surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe the premise that we are essentially I hate to say the word created these days, but more like bred, interbred with multiple extraterrestrials, the same way we bred, say, different dogs to be, more docile and for homes as opposed to wild wolves.
I don't know that we were necessarily bred, but I do sense, and my own common sense and intuition tells me that we definitely interbred. Whether you want to call it the Anunnaki or transdimensional extraterrestrial, intergalactic breeding, for lack of a better term. I'm certain, something along the lines like that happened.
Now, we seem to be having particularly this year, and unfortunately, if I say the C word or the P word, or talk about a flu-like, if you know what I'm talking about, essentially what's been happening this year, then this will sadly get shut down. But
I always say the issues we're dealing with is what I say on my channel.
Exactly. There you go. But we seem to have a huge resurgence of sightings. I mean, it seems to be like a record, like kind of like the golden years right after World War II, after we dropped the nukes, when we had the, through the late 40s and early 50s. It seems to be that 2020 and even the end of 2019, they seem to be watching us more and visiting us more, far more than before. Why do you think that's happening? Is it because of the C word?
Well, I believe that it's a symptom, not to sound cliche, a symptom of the, whether you want to call it the shutdown, whether you want to call it this quote unquote new normal. And what I mean by that is that now people are focusing within. They are focusing on themselves. They are not necessarily going to school, not necessarily going to work. And a lot of people have a lot more free time, whether they wanted it or not. They have a lot more free time. They might actually have the time now to go outside, to look up, to go within and connect with transdimensional beings. So I believe it's because I believe they've always been here. I just feel that now we just have more time and we're having the opportunity to experience that they're here and that they have been here.
I definitely agree with that statement that they have been here a lot longer than we've been here, and they still are here. As a matter of fact, I recently heard an interview with Dr. Fraver when someone asked him, I think it was Lex Fridman, I believe was the person who he did a podcast with, and essentially he was asked if this object was possibly hiding here. And Commander Fraver said, well, the planet is covered with 2/3 of ocean. And he asked the interviewer, what's the number one place that's the most unexplored? The ocean, especially the ocean. Well, obviously, if you have the ability to not be crushed by pressures of the water, if you have a gravity field around you, or what the fancy term was, believe it's Alcubierre warp drive, warp bubble, then you would hide near the bottom of the ocean because we really can't get there, especially the Mariana Trench.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, let's talk about the different types of ETs that have come here. And the reason why I know I'm crossing paths here from consciousness and ETs, because people who have had experiences with ETs are the ones who seem to be having so-called high strangeness afterwards. They seem to be finally more awakened to consciousness. They seem to be, So why do you think that is? Is it because they're in contact with beings that are tapping into their telepathy and awakening that way, or is something else going on during these visitations?
I agree with the first instance. That's exactly what happened to me, and that was, well, it started for me as a child with these transdimensional entities visiting me, but I was too afraid of them, and then I did it on purpose. and it made a huge difference. And now I've been in contact with them for the last 30 years, and that is, I can call them my guides, I can call them my angels, I can call them whatever, but they call themselves the emissaries of light, and have identified themselves as Arcturians. So yes, I do believe that all this awakening is us tapping into these extraterrestrial / trans-dimensional entities that are literally calling us forward to help the planet heal itself, help humanity heal itself, and to kind of nudge us from the inside, from the individual perspective, to this next level of human evolution. I fear the day when a government tells me the ETs are here, because we've already known that, those of us who have had the experience. And the idea, I'll never forget, about 5 years ago, I had Laura Eisenhower on my show, and she said, if you ever see a craft with nuts and bolts, that's man-made. She's like, stay away. And that really hit me, because for me, the ET experience is individual. I don't know if it's going to be a collective experience. And if it is, will I be able to trust my eyes? So those of us who have had contact with them and have ongoing contact with them are the ones that really are getting a lot of this information. And it just makes more sense to me.
It's really interesting that she told you that statement, because those exact words were uttered by Dr. Greer. Stephen Greer constantly says that if you see nuts and bolts on it, then it's not extraterrestrial. You know, and even Bob Lazar, when people interviewed him, which of course there hasn't been very many in the last 30 years after 1992. There's only been a handful here, but I know there's going to be a couple more coming. That's a little surprise, not for me, of course, but I just want everyone out there to pay attention to these biggest channels out there. That's as much as I'll say about it. But he talked about...
Well, you know, and to be fair to Laura, I may have asked her that question playing off of Stephen Greer's statement. It may have. I don't have a good memory.
Either way, I'm glad you brought this up, because the sport model that Bob Lazar worked on said that it seemed to be like from an injection mold. It had no... it was like all rounded corners. And he said it would be, the way he described it in 1990, 89, when he first started talking, when he came out as Dennis to George Knapp, before he fully came out, Bob Lazar, he said if you had built this model and then had made it out of wax and then melted it slightly so it would be, the mold would sort of, feel smooth, that's what it would be like. And that kind of struck me, because now we have 3D printers. And, 30 years ago, it's not something we even contemplated.
That's very true.
Now, going back to the questions from the chat. There's two here from Lasha Senyuk. What does he think of the idea that the UFOs may come through the center of the Earth rather than down from the sky?
I believe it's possible. I believe it's possible they're already down there. For all we know, they are the ones that are holding this planet together. But I personally don't know, but it's definitely something that I'm open to.
I've actually heard that as well, and I think the answer could possibly be all of the above, right? They could be interdimensional. They could be right here on the bottom of the ocean in Antarctica, places that we're, can't access, and maybe on other planets as well. And another thing, too, possibly time travelers. It's all very interesting to contemplate all that. Okay, second question from her. Does Bernard also think the Earth itself will also evolve or change?
I think we're kind of seeing that already. I believe we're going to have to. We as the organic planet itself, not necessarily, well, people are going to have to evolve in order to maintain life on the planet as it is changing. I know the climate change word can be a hot topic for people, but the reality of it is Earth does change. And as it changes, we are going to have to change. And I believe that's where the evolution of humanity comes into place. the Earth has been around for what, 2, 3, 4 million years, if not more. And I'm sure that the landscape has changed quite a bit. We've seen now we're seeing the magnetic North Pole beginning to shift. We're seeing ice caps beginning to melt because of that. So things happen. The sun itself just flipped its axis, what, a few years ago. So I think it's just in the nature of things to change and to evolve, and hopefully we evolve along with it.
I always assume that it's just natural cycles. That, if we, for instance, we've had multiple the ice age that we've had. There's apparently other smaller ice ages that happen every so often, and then there was also times where we didn't even have the an Arctic Circle because the water was the planet was much warmer, and also we do know from at least what scientists say that during the era of the dinosaurs, the air was far more richer in pure oxygen. It had a higher ratio of oxygen as opposed to the other elements in it, and that allowed for bigger growth of these monstrous creatures that we don't have
Yes,
anymore. And so,
exactly.
and that's why I think that this may be also just another cycle that we're going through. What I fear, though, is that I hope it's not one of those, earth-ending events, because obviously that wouldn't be good for us and and for our children and grandchildren, and therefore for the kids of the future. Because obviously, if we
Right.
lose it, then that would be the worst thing. Now, do you think that we have destroyed our planet beyond control, or do you think that what humans have done is such a small percentage as opposed to what is naturally occurring?
I I'm not educated enough on that as far as um, studying that in any academic way or whatnot. But common sense tells me if we are going to pour oil into water, we're going to kill life. Common sense tells me if we are going to choke the green forest or cut them all down and cover it in plastic and garbage, we're going to choke life. So it's just a matter of common sense. And, as far as how bad is it and how bad has it gotten, I'm not a scientist. I can't comment one way or the other, but my common sense tells me if we are killing the planet through our pollution, that it definitely is possible we are hurting it by nuclear waste and garbage and oil spills and destroying the life and cutting it all down.
Yeah, yeah, especially with what was happening in, I believe, the 70s, 80s, and further back than that with the just deforestation. That can't be good, destroying the lungs of the earth. And anyway, I just couldn't see how that would make sense, and I'm glad people finally changed and put more protection towards that. Another question for you from the chat. This is from Paul J. Is the population going to have to seriously reduce for the human race to survive?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I'm glad somebody asked that. I personally feel that this idea of lack is a part of the illusion and suppression of consciousness. There is more than enough food to feed the world. There is more than enough water to hydrate the world. We have the technology to desalinization technology to get the salt out of the oceanic water. We have the technology. We have the ability. It is only greed that is holding us back. So the only reason why we would need to depopulate the planet in any way would be out of greed and because people are withholding resources. We are throwing tons and tons of food away every day, and people are starving around the planet. So there is more than enough for everybody, in my personal opinion. It's just a matter of greed and selfishness.
Also, I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong on this part, I've heard that we have so much land in the United States that I believe Utah was the state I was told that can fit, if not the whole United States population, than the entire global population. If it's not Utah that can hold the entire global population, just the Earth population, then the United States in general could accommodate the almost 8 billion people. Do you think that is a plausible theory?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's so much landmass on this planet. I don't think we're anywhere near, falling off the edges of the continents and overfilling the planet. For me, it's a matter of what resources are available and living smartly. We can't be constantly consuming and throwing things out. 20 years ago, you would buy a television, you would take it to the television repairman if it broke, and it would last you 20 years. Nowadays, you have a TV for 3 or 4 years, it breaks, you throw it out. Computers, cell phones, we are constantly consuming and wasting, and our economy and our way of life is not sustainable. That's what's not sustainable. The planet is sustainable. Humans are sustainable. Just our behaviors have to change a little bit. But I don't believe depopulation is a need in any way.
Now, I remember hearing, actually, it was somebody who showed me a book which I didn't have a chance to get, let alone read, and I believe it was the Book of Ra, and it had something about the Law of One. And the reason I'm asking you is because you wrote a book which was called the Book of One. Can you tell us
Yeah.
about that?
Well, the Book of One is it kind of. I'll try to keep it short because I know we only have about 10 minutes left. The Book of One is I don't want to say a diary, but it shares my experience of my first contact with the transdimensional entities, the emissaries of light, who I've been working with now since the 90s. And it was an experience. It was a shamanic vision quest. I had a wonderful Algonquin teacher that taught me a bit about the Vision Quest experience. It was something that I had been studying. I've been studying metaphysics and magic and shamanism and all of these things through most of my life. And when I returned, it was almost as if, it wasn't almost as if, it was automatic writing. And all of this information, again, a download, all of this information kept being poured down into me, and I kept writing it all down. And I wrote the book probably in about 3 days, at least the information that they gave me. It took about 3 days. There's only about 40, 50 passages they gave me. I don't remember how much. But what had happened was my partner in the early 2000s said, why don't you publish it? You need to publish this information. This is very important information that the world needs to hear. And I met a woman named Annabelle, and she was the one who helped me start the Global Illumination Council back in the mid-2000s. And she said, why don't you contact the emissaries of light and have them expand on this information? And what we did is I allowed myself to go back and channel them, and we recorded the sessions, and she literally wrote word for word what they said to expand on each of the passages that they had given me. So this book, it was written by them. It was written by the emissaries of light, and it basically deals. Someone said to me, "Did you?" I'll give you a good example. Did you just steal the Tao Te Ching? Did you just copy the Tao Te Ching? I'm like, actually, I hadn't heard of the Tao Te Ching until about a year later. But thank you, because that means that's how profound it is. And I guess my answer to that, and maybe even associated with the Book of Ra and a lot of these wonderful books that are out there of channeled information, is that this is collective knowledge. This is infinite knowledge that we all hear it a little differently. We all experience a little bit differently. And this was the way that I interpreted it and interpreted the messages received from the emissaries of light. And it's been my handbook now for the last 30 years of how I deal with my life and what do I see as, not even what do I see, but what do I ingest and allow myself to feel as real and not real. There's a difference between perception, perspective, and infinite knowledge, eternal divine knowledge, in my opinion.
I'm going to hold off on my question to take this other question from Lasha. What do the light guides look like?
Oh, okay. Well, I actually did get to see them, and yes, I was pulled up in a craft, and they were, how shall I say, they were like just a ball of glowing blue light. They were a little shorter. They were probably a little bit shorter than me, and they kind of just like floated around and communicated with me telepathically. And that was my introduction to them. But it was interesting because actually, I'll share this with you because if we have enough time. When I was on the craft with them, they had me look into the center of the craft, looking down at the earth. And they pushed my consciousness into different parts of the earth. Now, this was the 90s. And one of the visions they gave me was of the war in Bosnia, and people getting blown up and slaughtered. Then they showed me the Ganges River and all the pollution and the muck and people being poisoned by the water. Then they showed me the Amazon rainforest. They showed me all the troubling sections of the planet back then to show me what we need to fix. And when I returned from that, the experience goes beyond them. They actually thrust me out of the craft, and I ended up going into the source consciousness. It was an amazing experience, this ball of light with no form. But as I left that and returned to Earth, they said, now you must go back and show everybody what we showed you. And that's why I wrote the book.
Now, the question I was going to ask you that I held off for a second was about Akashic Records. Can you tell us about them and what your take is about them?
I enjoy that topic quite a bit. The Akashic Records, well, for me, I actually have a good friend of mine, Anne Gail Rose, who studies them and actually channels them if you need her to. She's an awesome lady from Ireland, or married to an Irishman, I believe. But for me, the Akashic Records are that, well, I don't know if people have heard that term, the 0 point, the center of everything. And within the Akashic Records, within that 0 point, you can go in any direction and see and understand and sense your every past life, the entirety of your present life, and the entirety of all of your future lives. So it's almost, it's history and it's the present, but it's also what could happen, possibilities. It's a very fascinating topic for me.
The Akashic Records, the way I understand it, is it's the record of everyone's experience, and essentially we have the ability to tap into what all of our ancestors have experienced and also have known, and possibly is it true as well that we can also access the Akashic Records of people that are still living?
I would think so. I haven't heard anybody try it or do it, but I would believe so that their nature that would be possible.
Back to your experience with the ETs. Now, I know this from speaking to a lot of people who have been abducted, that usually they follow family lines. Do you think this has followed your parents and grandparents and so on and so forth, or did it start with you?
Well, that's a really interesting question for me personally, because I was adopted, and it wasn't until last year my son's mother, the mother of my son, did an ancestry DNA thing and traced my line back to the Seminole tribe of Florida. So I didn't even, my adopted mother used to say, oh, you're part Native American. Well, I didn't know anything about it for sure until last year that I'm Seminole. But the reason why it's very interesting for me is that one of my mystery school's teachers had done a kind of an Akashic record reading on me and said, your family had a curse put on them. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? My family from my blood, or my family that raised me? And he said, no, your adopted family, they've had this curse on them for generations, and you're going to break through it or something, because I was going through some rough times in my 20s when I started all of this. And it was very interesting. About 10 years ago, I found out that a woman, a brujo, put a curse on my family in Cuba, my adopted family in Cuba. So yeah, for me, I'm not sure. I know that my past lives did not really have any of these experiences. From what I remember, the 3 past lives I remember. So this new connection probably was waiting for this incarnation in my humble understanding.
Now, I do know that you are also a Reiki Master and a Doctor of Metaphysics. Can you briefly describe both of those for people who are not as familiar with them as you are or should be?
Well, Doctor of Metaphysics is just someone who has studied academically and experientially metaphysics. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that has to deal with the unknown and the intangible, or the divine. It's the study of God, to put it into academic terms. But it's very unknown, and there's no way to quantify it. So it's been ongoing study, and when we look at it from a modern stance, metaphysics has branched off into the paranormal. It's branched off into psychic ability. It's branched off into ceremonial magic, shamanism. All of these things seem to now fall under that umbrella of metaphysics. So I've allowed that title to stay with me over the years. And Reiki is literally, we were talking about how everything is energy and how consciousness, at the beginning of the show, is the consciousness of God, Goddess, the source of all things, life force energy. And that's all that Reiki is. You can call it chi, you can call it prana. And what a Reiki practitioner is a channel for that energy. And as a healer, we just direct that energy to your body, and it goes where it needs to go. And depending on if whether you want to call it your karma or your higher self, is willing to accept it because it's needed at that time in your own personal growth. And a Reiki Master is someone who has attained the highest degrees and is able to teach it and pass on the attunements. The attunements are done through these sacred symbols that are implanted into the person's energetic field.
Now, let's talk about healing for a moment here. I know you are a healer. Is that something you teach people? Is it something that can be taught, or is it something that people such as yourself who have experienced this awakening of consciousness and experienced the experiences that you've had, that are able to tap into that part of wherever it comes from to heal the people you work with?
Well, let me first define what healing is to me, especially as a Reiki Master. For me, healing is bringing balance where there is an imbalance, whether it be on a physical level, it could be an organ, it could be your bones, it could be your brain, or it could be your emotions. There could be some kind of energetic block, as well as spiritually, there could be a karmic block. So my belief is that when we are unhealthy, there is an imbalance going on in one of these energy bodies. I utilize and see the body as physical, mental, etheric, emotional, and spiritual. So I deal on 5 levels of the body. So if we do have a blockage there, let's say, for example, somebody has been sick most of their life, and there's nothing that they can do about it. And they've gone to the best doctors, they're eating healthy, they're doing everything they're supposed to do, but they can't seem to shake it. I would go into the spiritual body, and I would have to go back and see if there was something, was there a karmic reason? And again, karma is a deep topic, enough for a whole nother show. But let's say something happened 3 lifetimes ago that created a ripple. And again, I don't believe in good and bad or good and evil. Energy is not good or bad. Energy is not good or evil. Neither is magic. Neither is God or goddess. It's just energy is flowing in one direction. Someone created a ripple 3 lifetimes ago, and now that ripple is manifesting in this present incarnation let's say through, I don't know, a deformed left hand, for example. So I believe there's a reason for everything, and it's just a matter of, are we willing to restore balance to that aspect of ourselves, whether it is within the physical all the way up to the spiritual, dealing with any past life issues that we have yet to work through.
And now, do the people that you heal have to be in your physical presence, or is it something you could do remotely?
Oh, no, yeah, I mostly work remotely. I will usually work on people over the phone. I usually work on people on my show even. I'll just do a healing on my audience if I need to. I can do it through chat. So no, it's energy doesn't see time and space. Energy just flows. There are no barriers to energy. All it is a matter of focus and intent.
This question is also from Lasha in the chat. Has he also experienced the gray aliens or just only light beings?
I have never experienced the grays. I have a friend of mine who has, and she's pretty interesting, and she will explain the different types of grays. I didn't know there were different types of grays, and she's one of these people that try to clarify why they've gotten such a bad rap and whatnot. But I haven't. No, I haven't.
That's really interesting because I know that, and I'm glad you brought up the fact that there is more than one gray, because from what I've been told from people who've also been abducted by them, is that there seems to be, usually on one of the smaller scout ships, for instance, like the sport model, there may be one taller gray, maybe 4 to 5 feet tall, which is an actual biological gray. Where the others, it's ironic how now we would actually use the term artificial intelligence as opposed to what was said 20, 30 years ago, where they were glorified robots. And so some people say they seem to be the ones that sometimes may cause harm or are indifferent toward us, whereas the light beings are here for protection. So very interesting that you brought that up. Now, I do have to say to everybody out there, normally I would keep my guest on for 2 hours. Unfortunately, today I had to only limit it to 1 because of a commitment I have following after this, which you guys, if you check out the link, that third phase of Moon Left, I will be on with them and Goof on radio in the next hour, which is why, unfortunately, I will have to end this shortly, but Bernard Alvarez will definitely be back because we have so much more to talk about.
We sure do.
Yeah, and this is not enough, and I can promise you, folks, this is definitely going to be a recurring guest, absolutely. Now, with that being said, if you have a final statement for everybody, what would it be? And then also, where can people find you?
Certainly. And I'm so glad you asked that, because I asked that of my guests also. If you knew the world was listening, what would you tell them? And my answer is, be very wary of black and white. There is no absolute. There are no absolutely evil people. There are no absolutely evil ETs. There are no absolutely evil races or animals or anything like that. We must remember that we ourselves are not the same person we were this morning. We were not the same person we were during lunch. Our consciousness changes. And as our consciousness changes, our actions change. And as we change, so does everyone else. Let's not judge each other for an action that's not the wholeness of who we are as individuals. We are much more than one action.
Go on.
Yes. I was gonna go about my website, but
that's what I was gonna say. I would talk about your website, your books, and your show.
So real quick, you can find me at bernardalvarez.com. My book called The Book of One. This is a 4th edition that I put out last year with new information. The Book of One, Returning to Source Wisdom. You can find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, most of the booksellers online. I don't know of any physical places that have it. I do have a course that is going to be released called The Awakening Code. Will be released. I believe it'll be either October or early November. It's a five-part course, actually a 5-hour course that will walk you through the experience of awakening, everything from consciousness to meditation. I'll take you through a past life regression. I will do a Reiki healing on you. I'll be doing a soul retrieval on you, and I will introduce you to your spirit guides all throughout this course. It's really awesome. I'm really proud of that. And if you are into the tarot, there is also a course called Knowing the Tarot, and it's a masterclass that I taught several months ago that seems to be getting a lot of positive feedback. And then my show is called The Just Bernard Show. It's every Tuesday at 3 p.m. It's on my Facebook page, on my YouTube channel. And if you go to BernardAlvarez.com and click on show, you can get all the information there.
And we're talking about 3 p.m. Eastern, as we said, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Tuesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern.
Just wanted to make sure. And let me give some shout outs again. I want to thank Alex OAN. Thank you again for your super chat. I really appreciate your support. I also want to thank Pam Rettenberg, my social media manager, my video editor, and so much more. She is responsible for the amazing graphics and footage you saw today, and has been responsible for a lot that you've seen. And I also want to give a shout out to Third Phase of Moon, the world's largest UFO YouTube channel, who I constantly have worked with and have worked with for 8 years, over 8 years, literally going back to a year before I started doing this show, which at the time, if you guys were listening back then in 2013, it was actually titled Third Phase of Moon Radio until it changed to Rome Radio, Researchers Automation Radio, and then ultimately Dr. J Radio Live. And of course, I want to thank everybody who was in the chat, especially those who were asking the questions. Honestly, some of my favorite times, friends, are when I get to your questions, because the interaction between the audience and the guest is some of my favorite times, and I hope that was to you as well, Bernard. And of course, I do want to thank my guest, Mr. Bernard Alvarez. Now, Bernard, please hold on for a quick second so I can thank you again off air. With that being said, friends, be sure to check out the social media, which you could see posted up on the screen right now. And now we are officially